At 35 years old, I, Lacey Wilson, had secretly created a thriving tech empire that almost no one in my life knew about. As I drove back to my childhood home for Christmas dinner, the first time in 7 years, my stomach was in knots. My father, Harold, had always favored my brothers, Vincent and Gregory, but nothing could have prepared me for the bombshell he dropped during that meal. When he announced I was being cut from the inheritance, I simply nodded and continued eating. If you're watching this now, please hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from as I take you through the night that altered my family forever. I grew up in Oakage, a tight-knit Ohio town where everyone knew everyone else. Our family home was a grand colonial-style house on Maple Street, the kind that made neighbors assume we were wealthy. And to some extent we were. My father, Harold, had built a successful manufacturing business from nothing, a fact he never let anyone forget. From the time I was young, it was obvious who held the most importance in our household. My brothers Vincent and Gregory were groomed to take over the family business almost from the moment they could walk. Vincent, 3 years older than me, was the analytical one, gifted with numbers. Gregory, 2 years younger, had charm and a natural ability with people. Meanwhile, I was the middle child who never quite fit into my father's vision of success. "Business is a man's world, Lacey," he would often say. My mother, Diane, would give me sympathetic glances but never challenged him. She came from a generation where women stood behind their husbands, not beside them. School became my escape. I thrived academically, especially in math and computer science. While my brothers attended football games and business dinners with my father, I spent evenings in the computer lab with Mrs. Bennett, my high school teacher, who first introduced me to coding. "You have a real talent, Lacey," she told me during my senior year. "The world is changing. Technology is the future, and you could help shape it." When college applications rolled around, I set my sights on Stanford. Their computer science program was among the best in the country, and Silicon Valley was the heart of innovation. I worked tirelessly on my application, and when the acceptance letter arrived, I was overjoyed. My father, however, was not. "Stanford in California? That's absurd," he scoffed when I showed him the letter. "The family business is here. Besides, do you have any idea how expensive that school is?" I did know. I had researched scholarships and financial aid, but there was still a significant gap. When I was rejected for a crucial scholarship, I turned to my father for help. We were in his home office, a room filled with dark wood and leather, smelling of cigars. Behind his massive desk, he looked like a judge ready to deliver a verdict. "Your brothers need business degrees to take over the company," he explained. "That's where the family money should go. Your computer hobby isn't a real career." "It's not a hobby, Dad," I insisted. "It's what I want to do with my life." "Then you'll have to figure out how to pay for it yourself," he replied, turning back to his papers. The conversation was over, so I did exactly that. I deferred my admission for a year and worked 3 jobs: waitressing in the mornings, retail in the afternoons, and bookkeeping for local businesses at night. I saved every penny, took out loans, and finally made it to Stanford the following fall. College was brutal. While other students enjoyed the full college experience, I was constantly working to make ends meet. I barely slept 4 hours a night during finals. But I graduated with honors and, more importantly, with the skills and connections to break into the tech industry. My first job was at a small startup in San Francisco. The pay was modest, but the experience was priceless. I worked directly with the founders, learning everything I could about building a company from the ground up. When the startup was acquired 2 years later, I had enough savings and knowledge to consider launching my own venture. Back in Oakage, Vincent and Gregory had joined the family business as executives. Every phone call with my mother included updates about their achievements and my father's pride in them. I was happy for my brothers, truly, but the contrast in how our career paths were valued was impossible to ignore. The final straw came during a brief visit home 10 years ago. I had just launched my first company, a healthcare technology platform using artificial intelligence to improve patient care. We were pre-revenue, running on venture capital, and I was working around the clock to make it succeed. During a family dinner, my father asked about my little computer project in a dismissive tone. Actually, we just closed our Series A funding round, I said, trying to explain its significance. Series A? What does that even mean? My father interrupted. Real businesses make products and profits, not flashy presentations for investors. Vincent chuckled. Dad's right, Lacey. When are you going to get a real job? This is a real job, I countered. The technology we're building could revolutionize healthcare. Well, when you're done playing entrepreneur in California and ready to come back to reality, there might be a position in accounting at the family business, my father offered, as if he were doing me a favor. I left the next morning without saying goodbye. For the next several years, my contact with the family was limited to occasional calls with my mother and Christmas cards. They knew I was still in California, still in tech, but little else. I never shared my growing success, and they never really asked for details. Now, as I pulled up to the familiar house in a rented Toyota, I took a deep breath. My actual car, a custom Tesla, was safely parked in my garage in San Francisco. There was no need to arrive in a vehicle that cost more than most houses in this neighborhood. I had deliberately dressed down, swapping designer clothes for a simple sweater and jeans. The only luxury I couldn't bear to hide was my watch, a gift to myself when we hit our first 1 million users. But even that could be concealed under my sleeve. This Christmas dinner was my attempt at reconciliation, a chance to show my family who I had become despite their lack of support. Little did I know how dramatic that revelation would be. The house looked exactly as it always did during the holidays, multicolored lights outlining the roof and windows, a wreath on the front door, and the glow of the Christmas tree visible through the windows. For a moment, I felt like a teenager again, returning home to the smell of my mother's cooking. I hesitated before ringing the doorbell. 7 years is a long time to be estranged from your family. Would they see the changes in me? Would I fit in any better now than I had then? My mother answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Lacey, you made it!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. The familiar scent of her perfume brought back a flood of memories. Come in. Everyone's already here." Everyone was indeed there. As I stepped into the living room, a sea of familiar faces turned toward me. My brothers, Vincent and Gregory, stood by the fireplace, drinks in hand. Vincent's wife, Sophia, was arranging presents under the tree while their children, Tyler and Emma, now 14 and 12, were absorbed in their phones. Gregory's wife, Heather, was deep in conversation with Aunt Martha, my father's sister, while their 16-year-old son, Jackson, sat in the corner glued to his smartphone. Uncle Frank, Aunt Martha's husband, was watching a football game with Uncle James and Aunt Patricia, my mother's brother and his wife. And there, in his usual armchair like a king on his throne, sat my father. He looked older than I remembered, his hair now completely gray, but his posture was still commanding, his gaze still sharp as he assessed me. "Lacey," he said, nodding in acknowledgement. Not a hug, not even a rise from his chair, just my name, spoken like a statement. "Hi, Dad," I replied, matching his tone. "Merry Christmas." Vincent approached first, giving me an awkward side hug. "Welcome home, sis. California treating you well?" "It is," I said simply. "Still doing that app thing?" Gregory joined in, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Something like that," I answered vaguely. "Well, the family business is booming," Vincent continued. "We just expanded to 3 new states last quarter. Dad put me in charge of operations across the Midwest, and I'm handling all major client relationships now," Gregory added. "Revenue is up 37% since last year." The pattern was so familiar, it was almost comical. My brothers establishing their success, seeking approval, mocking their territory. I simply smiled and offered congratulations. And what about you, Lacey? My father finally spoke up. Did that startup of yours ever get off the ground? Before I could answer, my mother intervened. Dinner's almost ready. Lacey, would you help me in the kitchen? I gratefully followed her, escaping the interrogation. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of roast turkey, stuffing, and freshly baked pies. My mother had always been an exceptional cook, and Christmas dinner was her masterpiece. I'm so glad you came, she said as she handed me a stack of plates to carry. Your father would never admit it, but he's missed you. I doubted that, very much, but nodded anyway. How have you been, Mom? Really? She paused, considering the question. Oh, busy with the usual. The boys bring the grandchildren over often. Vincent and Gregory are at the house almost daily for business. Meetings with your father. She lowered her voice. I wish you called more often. Guilt tugged at me. I know I should have. Are you happy out there in California? Do you have someone special? The concern in her voice was genuine, and I felt a pang of regret for keeping her at such a distance. I'm happy, Mom. My work keeps me very busy, but I love what I do. No serious relationship right now, but that's okay. She squeezed my arm. As long as you're happy, that's what matters. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space reserved for holidays and special occasions. The table was set with the good china, crystal glasses, and silver that had been in the family for generations. I took my assigned seat between Aunt Martha and Emma, directly across from my father at the head of the table. The meal began with my father's traditional Christmas prayer, thanking God for family, prosperity, and another successful year of business. I noticed he made no mention of my return. Conversation flowed around me, carefully avoiding any potentially controversial topics: sports, the children's school activities, community gossip, anything but politics or personal matters that might disrupt the carefully maintained facade of family harmony. I focused on making conversation with my niece and nephew. Emma was now in middle school and had developed an interest in science. Tyler was in high school, playing basketball and thinking about colleges. Jackson, Gregory's son, barely looked up from his phone, even when spoken to directly. What are you so obsessed with over there? Gregory finally asked him. Research, Jackson mumbled, not elaborating. Put it away during dinner, Heather instructed. Jackson reluctantly complied, though I caught him sneaking glances at the device every few minutes. So, Lacey, Aunt Martha said beside me, Diane tells me you have your own business now. What exactly do you do? All eyes turned to me, and I felt the familiar pressure to downplay my achievements to avoid outshining my brothers or upsetting my father. I founded a healthcare technology company, I explained, keeping it simple. We build software that helps hospitals and doctors provide better care for patients. That sounds fascinating, Aunt Martha replied genuinely. Is it doing well? I could feel my father's gaze intensify. We're making progress, I said diplomatically. Vincent chuckled. Tech startups burn through investor money for years before they ever turn a profit, if they do at all. Meanwhile, manufacturing continues to be the backbone of the American economy. The family business just had its best quarter ever, my father added proudly. Your brothers have really taken it to the next level. And there it was, the redirection to the family business, to my brother's achievements, the clear message about what kind of success was valued in this house. I helped my mother and Sophia clear the plates after the main course, grateful for the momentary escape from the table. In the kitchen, Sophia surprised me with a genuine question. What's it really like running your own company? She asked quietly. Vincent never tells me much about the business side of things. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Constant pressure, impossible decisions, sleepless nights. But when you're building something you believe in, something that could actually help people, it's worth it. She nodded thoughtfully. That sounds more fulfilling than just carrying on something someone else built. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by my mother announcing it was time for dessert. As we returned to the dining room with pies and coffee, I noticed my father tapping his glass with a spoon, the traditional signal that he had something important to say. Little did I know this announcement would change everything. The room fell silent as my father stood at the head of the table, commanding attention as he always had. He was wearing his favorite navy blue sweater, the one he reserved for special occasions, and his expression was serious. "Before we enjoy Diane's wonderful desserts, I have an important announcement to make," he began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. "As you all know, Wilson Manufacturing has been growing steadily over the past few years, thanks largely to the exceptional work of Vincent and Gregory." My brothers straightened in their chairs, basking in the praise. Vincent's wife, Sophia, beamed proudly, while Gregory's wife, Heather, nodded in agreement. "We've recently acquired our biggest competitor in the Midwest, expanding our operations significantly," my father continued. "This means we're now the largest manufacturer of industrial equipment in 5 states, with plans to expand further in the coming year." Murmurs of approval circulated around the table. Uncle Frank raised his glass in a silent toast to my father, who acknowledged it with a nod before continuing. "With this growth comes the need for clear succession planning," he said. "I'm not getting any younger," he added with a small laugh that was echoed politely around the table. "So, after careful consideration and discussions with our family, Attorney, I've made some decisions about the future of the company and our family assets." I took a sip of water, already anticipating what was coming. This wasn't the first time I'd heard about succession planning, though it was the first time in years that I was present for such a discussion. "Vincent will take over as CEO when I retire next year," my father announced. "His financial acumen and operational expertise make him the natural choice to lead the company forward." Vincent nodded solemnly, accepting this expected coronation with practiced humility. "Gregory will serve as president, overseeing all client relationships and new business development, areas where he has already proven himself exceptional." Gregory smiled and raised his glass to our father in appreciation. "Together, they will guide Wilson Manufacturing into the next generation, preserving and building upon the legacy I have created." The table erupted in congratulations for my brothers. Aunt Martha patted Vincent's hand while Uncle James clapped Gregory on the back. My mother smiled proudly, though I noticed her glance in my direction with a hint of concern. My father cleared his throat, and the room quieted again. His gaze turned directly to me for the first time that evening. "As for the matter of inheritance," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, "I have decided to revise my will to reflect the contributions made to the family business." Here it comes, I thought, maintaining a neutral expression. "Vincent and Gregory will inherit equal shares of the company and the majority of our family assets," he stated firmly. Then, looking directly at me, he delivered the blow he had clearly been preparing. "Lacey, you will not be receiving an inheritance." Though I had anticipated this, hearing it stated so bluntly in front of the entire family sent a jolt through me. The room went completely silent. I could feel everyone's eyes darting between my father and me, waiting for a reaction. "You've chosen your path away from this family and business," my father continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than apologetic. "Vincent and Gregory have dedicated their lives to building what I started. They deserve the inheritance." I maintained my composure, meeting his gaze steadily. "I understand," I said calmly, picking up my fork and taking a bite of apple pie. The flavors barely registered as I focused on maintaining my dignity. The tension around the table was palpable. My mother's face had gone pale, her hands gripping her napkin tightly. Gregory looked vaguely uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with me. Vincent, on the other hand, wore a barely concealed expression of satisfaction. Aunt Martha broke the silence first. "Harold, is that really necessary to announce at Christmas dinner?" Her disapproving tone suggested she found the timing, if not the decision itself, inappropriate. "Family business should be discussed with family present," my father replied firmly, sitting back down. Now, let's enjoy dessert. Conversation slowly resumed around the table, though notably more subdued than before. I focused on my pie, aware of the occasional glances of pity or curiosity directed my way. As I sat there, memories flooded back. The time I had asked for help with college tuition and was refused. The dismissal of my career choices. The constant comparisons to my brothers. The subtle and not so subtle messages that, as a daughter, I was somehow less valuable, less worthy of investment. Yet beneath the familiar hurt was a strange sense of peace. I no longer needed my father's approval or financial support. I had built something on my own terms, something he could never take credit for or control. "Are you okay?" Emma whispered. Beside me, her 12-year-old face concerned. I smiled genuinely at my niece. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated relationships." She nodded with surprising understanding. "Grandpa can be really old-fashioned," she said. The conversation around the table had shifted to holiday plans and New Year's resolutions, the awkwardness of my father's announcement being carefully papered over with mundane topics. I participated minimally, offering appropriate responses when directly addressed. My mother's eyes kept finding mine across the table, silently communicating her distress. I gave her a small, reassuring smile. This wasn't her fault, and I didn't want her to suffer for my father's decisions. I was contemplating the earliest polite time to make my exit when Jackson, who had returned to his phone as soon as my father's announcement concluded, suddenly gasped loudly. His reaction was so dramatic that all conversation ceased and every head turned toward him. Little did anyone know that his next words would completely transform the evening and the family dynamic forever. "Aunt Lacey is on the Forbes billionaire list," Jackson exclaimed, his voice cracking with excitement as he stared at his phone screen in disbelief. The room went silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence, heavy with confusion and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Gregory asked his son, frowning. "There must be another Lacey Wilson," Vincent said dismissively. "Forbes just released their annual billionaire list, and he's probably confusing you with someone else." Jackson shook his head vigorously. "No, it's definitely her. Look." He turned his phone around, showing the screen to those nearest to him. "It even has her picture, and everything on it." My heart raced as realization dawned. The Forbes list had indeed been published that morning. My PR team had warned me I would be included despite my requests for privacy. The acquisition of my company had been finalized last month, and the terms were now public. "Let me see that," my father demanded, extending his hand for the phone. Jackson stood and brought the device to his grandfather. I watched as my father's expression transformed from skepticism to shock. His face paled noticeably as he stared at the screen. "This says you're worth $3.2 billion, he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he looked up at me. You founded Health Tech AI, which was just acquired by a tech giant." All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, knowing the moment of truth had arrived sooner than I had planned. "Yes," I confirmed simply. "That's correct." The room erupted in exclamations and questions, everyone talking over each other. "$3 billion? You sold your company? How long have you been keeping this secret? Are you really a billionaire?" Raised my hand slightly, and to my surprise, the table quieted. Perhaps wealth commanded respect, even in this family. "I founded Health Tech AI 7 years ago," I explained calmly. "We developed an artificial intelligence platform that helps doctors diagnose rare diseases and create personalized treatment plans. Last month, we were acquired by a tech giant for a combination of cash and stock." "But why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, her voice small and confused. I looked at her with genuine affection. "I wanted to be seen for who I am, not what I've accomplished or acquired. When I left 7 years ago, it was clear that my path wasn't valued or understood by this family. I needed to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. Vincent's face had turned an interesting shade of red. So all this time, while we thought you were struggling with some small startup, you were becoming a billionaire. It, wasn't overnight, I clarified. The first 3 years were incredibly difficult. We almost went bankrupt twice. I lived in a tiny apartment and put everything back into the company. The breakthrough came 4 years ago when our algorithm correctly diagnosed a rare condition that had stumped specialists for years. After that, hospitals started signing up rapidly. You could have shared your success with us, my father said, an unfamiliar note of hurt in his voice. I met his gaze directly. Would it have mattered, Dad? You made it clear that the only business you respected was the family manufacturing company. The only success you valued was the kind Vincent and Gregory achieved by following in your footsteps. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air between us. Gregory's wife, Heather, broke the tension with a practical question. What exactly does your company do? In simple terms, I appreciated the redirect and explained more fully. Our AI system analyzes millions of medical records, research papers, and patient data to identify patterns humans might miss. It helps. Doctors diagnose difficult cases and suggests treatment options based on the latest research and similar cases worldwide. We started in rare diseases but expanded to cancer treatment, cardiology, and neurology. The platform is now used in over 2,000 hospitals globally. That's actually impressive, Gregory admitted, looking somewhat sheepish. So that's why you were researching her company, Heather said to Jackson, pieces falling into place. Jackson nodded. I've been following health tech AI for a school project on artificial intelligence. I had no idea until today that Aunt Lacey was the founder. When the acquisition news broke this morning, her name and photo appeared on all the tech news sites. Then Forbes updated their list. $3.2 billion, my father repeated, still seeming dazed. And I just told you that you wouldn't be getting an inheritance. The irony was not lost on anyone at the table. A few nervous laughs escaped, quickly stifled. I think I'm doing okay without it, I said with a small smile, trying to ease the tension. Vincent, ever the businessman, was already shifting gears. We should talk about potential collaborations between our companies. The manufacturing sector could benefit tremendously from artificial intelligence solutions. I'm sure Lacey has better things to do than help out the family business now. Aunt Martha interjected, giving me a knowing look. She had always been the most perceptive member of the family. My mother had tears in her eyes. I'm so proud of you, she said softly. I always knew you were special. Did she? I wondered. Had she really known? Or was this retrospective pride? Either way, I appreciated the sentiment. Why did you come back in a rented Toyota if you're so wealthy? Tyler asked, with the directness only a teenager could get away with. I laughed genuinely. I didn't want to make a big entrance or have everyone treat me differently because of money. I wanted to reconnect as just Lacey. That worked out well, Gregory commented dryly, but with a hint of humor. The dynamic in the room had shifted, dramatically. My father seemed smaller, somehow less commanding in his chair at the head of the table. Vincent was recalculating. I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he reassessed my value to him. Gregory appeared genuinely interested in my story, perhaps seeing me truly for the first time. But it was the expressions of the youngest generation that gave me the most hope. Emma was looking at me with wide-eyed admiration, while Tyler and Jackson were firing off questions about technology and business that showed real engagement. As the initial shock wore off, the conversation fractured into smaller discussions. I found myself describing the early days of my company to a captivated audience of aunts and uncles, explaining how we secured our first round of funding and the pivotal clinical trial that proved our technology worked. Through it all, my father remained uncharacteristically quiet, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Was it regret, reevaluation, or simply calculation of what my new status might mean for him and his legacy? I knew we would need to have a private conversation before the evening ended. The dynamic between us had fundamentally changed, but money alone couldn't heal the wounds of years of emotional neglect. That would require something more valuable than billions: honesty, accountability, and a willingness to change. As I finished, explaining our global expansion to Uncle James, I noticed my father quietly rise from his seat and head toward his study. Our eyes met briefly, and he tilted his head slightly, an unspoken invitation to follow. It was time for a long overdue conversation. The atmosphere in the dining room had transformed entirely. Where there had been tension and awkwardness before, now there was a buzz of excitement and curiosity. Everyone seemed eager to engage with me, to hear about my company and life in California. Vincent approached as I was preparing to follow my father to his study. "Lacey, we should discuss potential business opportunities," he said, his tone markedly different from earlier. "Our manufacturing processes could benefit greatly from AI optimization." "Perhaps another time, Vincent," I replied politely. "I think Dad wants to speak with me." Of course, he nodded quickly. "But before you leave town, we should definitely set aside some time to talk strategy." I smiled noncommittally and made my way toward my father's study, a room that had once been forbidden territory unless specifically invited. As a child, being called to the study usually meant I was in trouble. Today, it felt different. I was entering not as a daughter seeking approval, but as an equal. The study looked much the same as I remembered. Dark walnut bookshelves lined the walls, filled with business books and family photographs, most featuring my brother's achievements. The large mahogany desk dominated the room, and behind it sat my father, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Close the door," he said as I entered. Not a request, but not quite the command it would have been years ago. I did so, and took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, crossing my legs comfortably. "You wanted to speak with me?" He cleared his throat. "I think we have some things to discuss." "We do," I agreed, waiting for him to continue. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "What you've accomplished is impressive," he began, the words seeming insufficient even to him. "Building a company of that magnitude, especially in technology, is no small feat." "Thank you," I said simply. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "About what I said earlier regarding the inheritance." "Dad," I interrupted gently, "I don't need your money. I didn't come here today expecting an inheritance or hoping to be included in your will. That's not why I'm here." "Then why did you come?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. After 7 years of minimal contact, this was the heart of it, the question that mattered more than any discussion of wealth or business success. "I came because, despite everything, you're still my father, and this is still my family," I said honestly. I came hoping that perhaps time had changed perspectives, that we might find a way to have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than conformity to your expectations. He looked down at his hands, weathered from years of work. "I've always respected you, Lacey." "Have you?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "You dismissed my education, my career choice, and my ambitions. You made it clear that the only path worthy of respect was following in your footsteps, which was never an option offered to me because I'm a woman." He flinched slightly at the directness of my words. "Times were different when I built this company. I wanted to protect you from failure, from the brutality of the business world. 9 out of 10 startups fail. I didn't want to see you get hurt." "But it was okay if I was hurt by your lack of support," I countered. "By being told repeatedly that my dreams were less valuable than my brother's, by being excluded from family legacy discussions." He had no immediate response to that. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, my father seemed to be genuinely reflecting on his actions. "I built my company with no help from anyone," he finally said. "I thought you should do the same. I did, I finished for him. But there's a difference between giving someone the space to succeed independently and actively dismissing their potential. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of misunderstanding between us. I am proud of what you've accomplished, he said eventually. I should have said that earlier. Thank you, I replied, recognizing how difficult those words were for him. But this isn't just about my business success, Dad. If I had built a modestly successful company worth a few million instead of billions, would we be having this conversation? Would you still be reconsidering your perspective? His silence was answer enough. That's the problem, I continued softly. Your respect and approval have always been conditional on success as you define it. That's not how family should work. My father looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, an unprecedented acknowledgement of fallibility. Neither do I entirely, I said honestly. But recognizing there's something to fix is a start. I don't expect decades of patterns to change overnight. I'm not even sure they can change completely, but I would like to try to build a different kind of relationship going forward. What would that look like? He asked, and I was struck by the genuine curiosity in his tone. It would start with seeing me for who I am, not who you expected me to be, I explained. It would involve showing interest in my work because it matters to me, not because of its monetary value. It would mean acknowledging that there are many valid paths to a meaningful life, not just the one you chose. He nodded slowly. I can try to do that. That's all I'm asking for, I said. Just try and I will too. As we sat there in his study, I realized something important. I had come to this dinner seeking some form of reconciliation, but I had expected it to be on my terms, validated by my success. In that way, perhaps I was more like my father than I cared to admit, seeking to prove my worth through achievement rather than connection. There's something else I should tell you, I said after a moment. I've established a scholarship fund at my old high school in Mrs. Bennett's name. It provides full college tuition for young women pursuing degrees in STEM fields. My father looked surprised. That's generous. It's personal, I corrected gently. Mrs. Bennett believed in me when no one else did. I want other girls to have that support, regardless of whether they get it at home. The implication was clear, but not accusatory. My father nodded, understanding the message. I should get back to the others, I said, standing up. But I'm glad we had this talk. As I reached the door, my father called my name. I turned back to see him standing now, too, looking somewhat uncertain. I'm sorry, Lacey, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. For not seeing your potential, for making you feel less valued than your brothers. You deserved better. The apology was imperfect, perhaps too little and certainly too late, but it was sincere, and in that moment it was enough to open a door that had been closed for far too long. Thank you, Dad, I said simply, and left to rejoin the family gathering, feeling lighter than I had in years. When I returned to the living room, the dynamics had shifted dramatically. Small groups had formed throughout the space, conversations flowing more naturally than during the stilted dinner. My mother approached immediately, concern evident in her expression. Is everything all right? What did your father say? She asked in a hushed tone. We had a good talk, I assured her. Probably the most honest conversation we've ever had. Relief washed over her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something that looked surprisingly like guilt. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked. We moved to the kitchen, which was momentarily empty. My mother leaned against the counter, her hands fidgeting with her apron. I owe you an apology too, she said quietly. I should have stood up for you more. When your father dismissed your dreams, when he refused to help with college, when he favored the boys, I should have said something. Mom, you did what you could, I began, but she shook her head. No, I didn't. I was raised to believe that a wife supports her husband's decisions, that contradicting him publicly would undermine his authority. But that silence came at your expense, and I'm truly sorry for that. Her candor surprised me. My mother had always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts rather than addressing them directly. I always thought you were incredible, she continued. Your determination, your intelligence. When you left for California on your own, I was terrified for you, but also so proud. I just never said it loud enough for you to hear over your father's disapproval. I took her hand. I hear you now, Mom, and I appreciate it more than you know. She wiped away a tear. All these years I've kept a folder of news articles about you and your company. Whenever I saw your name mentioned online, I printed it out. Your father never knew. This revelation touched me deeply. While my mother had not openly defended me, she had been silently supporting me all along. I would love to see that folder. Sometime, I said, giving her a hug. As we returned to the living room, Gregory approached, looking uncharacteristically humble. Got a minute? He asked, gesturing toward the back porch. Outside, the cold December air was refreshing after the emotional intensity of the evening. Gregory leaned against the railing, looking out at the backyard where we had played as children. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. I've been a terrible brother. Gregory, you don't have to. No, I do, he insisted. I followed Dad's lead in dismissing what you were doing. Worse, I enjoyed the favoritism without questioning whether it was fair to you. The truth is, I've always admired your courage, following your own path, moving across the country, building something from nothing. That takes guts. His sincerity was unmistakable, and I felt a warmth toward my younger brother that I hadn't experienced in years. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot. For what it's worth, I think what you've built is incredible, he added. Not because of the money, but because it actually helps people. Our widgets just sit in factories. Your technology saves lives. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching our breath form clouds in the cold air. How's Jackson doing? I asked, changing the subject. He seems pretty interested in technology. Gregory smiled proudly. He's brilliant with computers, takes after his aunt apparently. He's been talking about majoring in computer science, but I didn't know how to guide him. Maybe you could. I'd be happy to talk with him. Offered. Help him explore options, maybe set up some internship opportunities if he's interested. That would be amazing, Gregory said gratefully. When we returned inside, I found Emma sitting alone on the window seat, watching something on her tablet. What are you working on? I asked, sitting beside her. She looked up shilly. Just a coding tutorial. I'm trying to learn Python. My heart leapt. Really? That's wonderful. What got you interested in coding? We had a technology week at school, and I really liked the logic of it, she explained, her face lighting up. Mom got me this online course for Christmas, but it's kind of confusing sometimes. I could help you with that, I offered, and maybe introduce you to some women engineers at my company who could mentor you. Her eyes widened. You'd do that for real? Absolutely, I assured her. In fact, my company runs a summer program for high school students interested in tech. You'd be eligible in a few years. The excitement on her face reminded me of myself at her age, discovering the world of possibilities that technology represented. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in a series of meaningful conversations that would have been unimaginable just hours before. Vincent's initial attempt to discuss business opportunities had been transparent and self-serving, but when I spoke with him later, I sensed a genuine, if grudging, respect. You know, I always thought you were just being stubborn, refusing to join the family business, he admitted. I never considered that you might be building something better. Different, not better, I corrected. Just better suited to my interests and strengths. Even Aunt Martha had insights to share. Your grandmother would have been so proud of you, she told me quietly. She wanted to start her own business back in the 1950s, but your grandfather insisted it wasn't appropriate for a woman. She channeled all that ambition into community work instead. But I always wondered what she might have accomplished with today's opportunities. These glimpses into family history and the shifting perspectives around me were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Jackson sought me out as the evening was winding down. Aunt Lacey, I have so many questions about artificial intelligence and machine learning. Do you think sometime I could tour your company or something? His enthusiasm was infectious. I'd love that, Jackson. In fact, why not come out to California? This summer? You could shadow different teams, get a real sense of how a tech company operates. Are you serious? He exclaimed. That would be insane. We'll make it happen, I promised, making a mental note to discuss it with Gregory and Heather. The evening might have continued in this vein of reconnection and new understanding, but around 9:00 my phone rang. It was Sarah, my COO and closest friend. Lacey, I'm sorry to interrupt your family time, but we have a situation with the integration team, she explained rapidly. The tech giant's engineers made some changes to the core algorithm without proper testing, and 3, hospitals are reporting issues with the system. How serious? I asked immediately, shifting into business mode. No patient impact yet, but we need to roll back the changes immediately. And their CTO is pushing back. We need your authority on this. I'll be on a video call in 20 minutes, I promised, then ended the call. I found my mother to explain the situation. I have to leave early. There's a work emergency that needs my attention. Of course, dear, she said, understanding in her eyes. Will we see you before you head back to California? I'll make time, I promised. Maybe breakfast tomorrow. As I said my goodbyes, I was struck by how different they felt from when I had arrived. There were hugs from my niece and nephews, a warm embrace from my mother, respectful handshakes from my brothers, and even a brief, awkward hug from my father. We'll talk more, he promised as I was leaving. There's a lot to catch up on. I nodded cautiously, optimistic. I'd like that. Driving away from the house that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few hours. The revelation of my success had forced a reckoning that was long overdue. But money alone couldn't heal relationships. That would take time, effort, and willingness on all sides. But for the first time in many years, I felt that such healing might actually be possible. 1 year later, I found myself once again driving toward my childhood home for Christmas dinner. Unlike the previous year, I drove my own car, no longer, feeling the need to downplay my success. The anxiety that had accompanied last year's visit was replaced by cautious optimism. So much had changed in 12 months. My relationship with my family had been rebuilt gradually through consistent effort on all sides. It hadn't been easy or perfect, but it had been genuine. My father had surprised me the most. 2 weeks after last Christmas, he had called to tell me he was seeing a therapist, something I never would have imagined possible for a man of his generation and temperament. I want to understand why I treated you the way I did, he had explained. And more importantly, I want to do better. That commitment to growth had manifested in various ways throughout the year. He had asked thoughtful questions about my company during our regular phone calls. He had read articles about women in technology and sent them to me. He had even flown out to California twice to see my office and meet my team. The family business had evolved as well. Vincent and Gregory had indeed taken over leadership as planned, but they had implemented significant changes. They had created a formal internship program to bring more women into manufacturing management. They had established a technology division focused on modernizing their processes. And most surprisingly, they had appointed my mother to the board of directors, acknowledging that her years of listening to business discussions at the dinner table had given her valuable insights. As I pulled into the driveway, I smiled at the sight of multiple cars already parked outside. This year, I wasn't the last to arrive. My mother greeted me at the door with a warm embrace. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Everyone's already here," including some special guests. Inside, the living room was filled with familiar faces, but also some new ones. Sarah, my COO, was chatting animatedly with Gregory about artificial intelligence. Two young women from our engineering team were showing Emma something on a laptop. Jackson was deep in conversation with our lead data scientist, who had been his mentor during his summer internship. This blending of my professional and family worlds would have been unimaginable a year ago. My father approached, looking more relaxed than I had ever seen him. "Merry Christmas, Lacey," he said, giving me a genuine hug. "We have some exciting news to share at dinner." The dining room table had been extended to accommodate everyone. As we gathered around, I noticed something different about the seating arrangement. My father was not at the head of the table. Instead, he and my mother sat side by side in the middle, symbolically changing the power dynamic that had defined our family for decades. As we enjoyed the meal, conversation flowed naturally between topics: business, technology, personal updates. The rigid boundaries that had once separated acceptable dinner discussion from taboo topics had dissolved. After the main course, my father stood to make an announcement, much as he had the previous year. But his demeanor was entirely different. "I want to share some news about Wilson Manufacturing," he began. "As you know, Vincent and Gregory have been leading the company for the past year, and they've done an exceptional job." My brothers nodded appreciatively, but he continued. "They've also shown me that my vision for the company was too limited. Today, I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Wilson Innovation Fund, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs in technology and manufacturing." Surprised murmurs circulated around the table. "This fund will be led by a board consisting of Diane, Lacey, and a rotating position filled by the women in our extended family, starting with Emma once she turns 18, he continued. "We will be allocating 5% of the company's annual profits to support women who, like Lacey, have the vision and determination to build something important." I was speechless. This was not just a token gesture, but a meaningful commitment to systemic change. "Additionally," my father went on, "we've established the Bennett Scholarship, which will fully fund college education for 5 young women each year who are pursuing degrees in STEM or business." I caught my mother's eye across the table. She was beaming with pride, not just in my father's announcement, but in her own role in shaping these initiatives. She had found her voice this past year, and the entire family was better for it. After dinner, I found a quiet moment with my father in the backyard. The winter air was crisp, the sky clear and filled with stars. "The Innovation Fund is an incredible initiative," I told him. "Thank you for doing that." "It was the right thing to do," he replied simply. "I spent too many years limiting opportunity rather than creating it. I can't change the past, but I can help shape a better future. That's all any of us can do." I agreed. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You know, I always thought legacy was about passing on what I had built, preserving it exactly as I created it," he reflected. "But I've realized that true legacy is about passing on values that allow the next generation to build something even better, something I might never have imagined." Those words reflected the profound change in my father, a change I had never thought possible. It wasn't a perfect resolution, not a complete transformation, but it was genuine growth. And in families, as in life, that is often the most we can hope for. Inside, the house was filled with conversation and laughter. Emma was showing me the coding project she had been working on. Jackson was discussing his college applications, with several top computer science programs on his list. Gregory and Vincent were engaged in a friendly debate about the future of AI in manufacturing. My mother approached with a warm smile. "This is what I always wanted," she said softly. "All of us together, truly together, not just in the same room." As I looked around at my family, both blood relatives and the chosen family I had built through my company, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been difficult, filled with pain and misunderstanding, but also with growth and eventual healing, Success and wealth had opened the door to reconciliation, but it was the harder work of honest communication, accountability, and forgiveness that had allowed us to walk through that door together. In the end, my worth had never been about the number on the Forbes list. It had been about staying true to myself, building something meaningful, and finding the courage to offer forgiveness when it would have been easier to hold on to resentment. That night, as we gathered for a family photo, I realized that the true measure of wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you build together with those you love. If you're watching this and have experienced family dynamics where your worth was questioned or your path dismissed, I hope my story offers some comfort. Remember that validation ultimately comes from within, not from others' approval. Your path may not be understood by those closest to you, but that doesn't make it any less valuable or worthy of pursuit. Have you ever had to prove yourself to family members who doubted you or found reconciliation after years of misunderstanding? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their unconventional path can lead to both success and healing. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to forge our own path, even when others can't see where it leads.